Mixing with Mike mixing tip using rack plugins. Rack plugins are something that is relatively new in the plugin world, and it's a still developing thing, and it's an offshoot of a lot of what's happened in the hardware world, where people have gotten into the 500 series racks, which have been around for quite a while. They were initially created by API. For use, they used to create these things called lunch boxes, which would give you a rack of 4 or 6 different units, and you could fit API components into it. The exact same configuration as they would be in their actual consoles. And this ended up getting split out. So there were other companies that had very similar types of configurations for their stuff. And eventually, other manufacturers started to build components that could fit into these racks. Now, if you go to if you just look up 500 series racks online, you'll see that there's just like every manufacturer has some form of a hardware device that will fit into one of these racks that allows you to use them. The cool part about it is that you can basically set up a configuration of whatever mic preamps, equalizers that you like to use, compressors, fit them into this rack, and then you continue to expand it. So you buy a rack, they're relatively inexpensive, and then you can kind of fill it with components as you go along and have the gear that you love, right, without taking up a huge amount of space. So this idea is carried out in a number of different plugins, and I'm going to demonstrate or just kind of show a few of them just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on with them. One of the things that is kind of a cool thing here is made by Slate Digital, and this is their virtual mix rack. And the idea of the virtual mix rack is exactly this type of thing, where you can actually take something here and basically build a setup. Like, so if we wanted to go with a Neve type of thing, so we have a little of an amplification thing here. So maybe we go with a Neve 1073, and then we want to put a compressor. So we put a Focusrite Red compressor in there. And if we need a little bit more equalization, because you can never have enough EQ or compression, you could throw an SSL channel in there, etc. And then because you just got a crap load of gain, you can throw a trimmer plugin on the end to kind of clean it all up in the end. And so what you can do is you can basically build these setups. You can save and store them and copy them and do all of those sorts of things. And the cool part about setting up things like this is that you can essentially create preset setups that you can use. So when you call this up, you could bring them up, load up your presets for drums or bass or vocals or whatever, and then you basically have the gear that you want to use, and then you don't need to use everything, right? You can take components in and out individually, and all of that is really cool. And the cool part about this is that if you work a lot with the Slate Digital stuff, is that you can work within this realm and work with the emulations and kind of bring in the character sounds that you want for each individual thing. The cool part about this is that this collection will continue to grow. So over the years, Slate Digital will add different components and new emulations and things that will automatically be part of the mix rack, or maybe you have to purchase to add into the mix rack. But you have those things available. So just like having the actual analog rack, it's really cool. So the only problem with this is that it only works with Slate Digital products. And that's sort of the downside here. And so what you end up with is the ability to access Slate Digital's plugins and create your own presets, and and that is actually just in itself is very useful and a very powerful way of using things. So we'll kind of knock this off for a second here, and then let's go to another one. Waves also has a processor, and this is called Studio Rack. So in a very similar way to the mix rack. Oops, hold on here. It's looking for something that I'm not going to hunt for right now. This is actually Waves version, and very similar to this when you load up or add a plugin here. If you open up the plugin list, what you get is the entire or almost the entire Waves collection. So if I just wanted to go to EQs, for example, I can actually start off here with a 550A if that's what I want. And then that opens up in my rack. And now if I want to put in a compressor, I can go here to dynamics. And what I get is so let's just stay with the API theme and kind of work with that. And then I can kind of continue to add plugins and kind of build like a whole setup here. And very similarly, what I can do is I can store presets and load these different configurations and stuff. So I don't know, what else do I want to put? maybe I want to put a little tape compression on it or something like that, so I can throw that in there. So now what I can do here is I can move these things around, right, which is cool. So I can put my compressor first, my EQ next, etc., kind of slide them around, move them within each other. There I can store presets. What's really cool is that it works within the Waves toolbar system. So each plugin has its own toolbar A and B settings, and then I have an A and B setup for the entire mix rack. There are several things that are really, really cool about this. One is that if you have the Digi iOS or DigiGrid system, you can actually assign this processing to automatically run through an external processor. And so that's a very cool system. I actually just don't have it booted up right here. But this would allow me to take any Waves plugins, feed them off to an external CPU, sort of like what Universal Audio does. The problem with Universal Audio is that it works only on the insert and here, so you're not working within a rack configuration. And you're stuck with the processing. Here, what's really cool is that even within the studio rack, if I don't have that Digi setup, it will go default back to the native processing. So I can work native or I can work through the external processor. And that's a really, really cool aspect of this. The similar problem exists here, though, is there are no other plugin manufacturers who are on board with the system who kind of work through it. So what you end up with here is the ability to you're only able to use Waves plugins. So very similar to what the Slate Digital setup is. So that part of it is still cool because Waves has like 150, 160 plugins. So you have an enormous collection to select from. And here again, you can store huge numbers of presets. You can assign knobs to particular controls on plugins that are here. You have all the full functionality of the original plugin as it operates natively. And the ability to feed off the processing, so you just have an enormous amount of control in terms of the way that you work it and use it. All of the features are still automatable through the system, so even though it's in the studio rack, it still goes through the automation system of Pro Tools or whatever your application is. It's very, very cool. A lot of control, a lot of features, the ability to copy, disable plugins, remove plugins, copy plugins, etc. It shows you the latency for each plugin and the total rack latency. So a lot of features and functionality. Very, very cool. Other companies, one other thing that is sort of an interesting thing, and there are a couple companies that make them, are plugin chainers. So there's another one here made by Plugin Mix, and this is a really cool one. This is called the PM Chainer. And what this does, there's another Blue Cat Audio has something that's very similar to this. What you have is this works with VST plugins, all VST plugins. So if you're working, for example, in a host like Pro Tools 11 or Pro Tools 12, where you're working primarily with AAX plugins, this gives you the ability to access your VST library of plugins. So if you have certain plugins that are in VST but not in AAX, maybe because the manufacturer hasn't put it off into that, then you can kind of go in here and you can actually, get to any plugins that you have in your collection. So like, for example, right here, I can just go in and load myself up, a FabFilter compressor, and then that FabFilter compressor now shows up here, and I can adjust my settings, etc. And it opens up like a separate window. I can take it in and out. It has a separate mix control. I can actually blend the percentage that I want of it in. I can solo it up, which solos just this while negating any of the other processing. I can mute it, right, which would defeat it within or take it basically out of the circuit. There's also a setup here that allows you to run them all in series, meaning that it runs from one into the other all the way through, or you can run them all in parallel, which means that what you can do is you can have like a mixer. So you could have like 10 different or 8 different compressor setups here, and then you could blend them all in a parallel chain and then kind of get a mix of all those different compressors kind of combined together, or have them up on faders and create your own thing where you have distortion, you have equalization, you have heavy compression, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and then you can mix all those things sort of in parallel and kind of blend them all. So it's really, really cool in that way. And then you get different setups here. So you can set up different things. You can store presets. There's an editor here for the output that allows you to do spreading, and it's got a clip gain thing on the end, which is really cool. And so this is really kind of a cool thing because if you have, not all plugins will run, for example, through Pro Tools or certain applications. So this will give you access to your library of other plugins for VSTs. I believe the one that is run by Plucat Audio also runs with audio unit plugins. So that allows you, so essentially, even if you just wanted to access a particular plugin that's not available in AAX, then this would be the way to do it and to kind of get to it. So very, very cool. And then, from here, if you just click on the editor, you can open up that plugin. And then, just kind of click there to open it up. There also, P&M also makes their own plugin series. So they have those that are available directly. So it's sort of a rack configuration type of thing, but they are VST capable, and that just like opens up like a whole other horizon for that. So that is like it's a very cool one, So this is kind of an interesting offshoot of the whole studio rack kind of thing, or that idea. So there are many other ones that are out there. McDSP has a couple, one that has a whole rack full of EQs and another rack full of different compressors. The problem is you can only select one of them. The idea is that you can call up the same basic EQ settings and then toggle through all the different vintage options that you have available and hear it if it was a Pultec with those settings, or a Neve if it was those settings, or an SSL E-Series EQ or something if it was those settings. Same with the compressors. And that's very cool, but you only get one from the selection. And so there are all kinds of variations of these things going on, and it's something to kind of keep an eye on and take a look at. But there's a lot of really, really cool stuff out there. It continues to grow, and it's worth keeping your eye on some of these things. I think this one is sort of a no-brainer of all of them, just because of the flexibility to basically access anything and then store presets for yourself and your own settings, and kind of stay within that architecture. And that way you can, kind of piece together things from different manufacturers without a problem. All right, that's anyway, mostly just talking here, no audio, but just to give you an idea of like some of the different options that are out there. So mixing with my mixing tip using rack plugins.